Hi, this is Chad Lang here, and in this video I am finally going to be reading from this book right here, Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control. Now, before I get into it, I kind of want to introduce it a bit. So as I've said before, I have spent 9 years in the Calgary single adult congregations, and I was not impressed with my experience in those congregations. And during the latter half of my experience in those congregations, I was writing Facebook notes expressing my angst, if you will. And I want to go back. I want to do a series on revisiting those Facebook notes because often I found I was on the cusp of describing what my issues were, but I just wasn't finding the right words or the right concepts to put a pin in it, so to speak. So reading this book, once I did, was a game changer for me. And that's after I left, I basically ran away from the church and gave myself permission to do a bunch of research and look at stuff that they don't want you to look at. And so when I was perusing Utah Lighthouse Ministries website, that book jumped out at me. And then I looked for it on Amazon because it's a lot cheaper to order stuff on Amazon. There's certain stuff that only Utah Lighthouse Ministries has, though, and so you kind of have to get it through them. And now they're gone now, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. But I ordered it off Amazon and I read it, and it introduced and nailed down all the concepts that I was trying to describe, all the feelings of hurt that I had, and my problems with the environment that I just could not quite find the right words to express. And so we're going to get into it, and I want this to be an open invitation, assuming that I have any kind of Mormon audience at all. If I were to entertain the notion of returning to church, whatever bishop I get, whatever bishop I work with, we have to have a discussion about this. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you like the fact that I largely agree with it or not, we have to talk about it. Now, there's certain things in there that you cannot accept as a believing member of the church, and I get that. And if I were to entertain the notion of returning to church, there's certain things in there that I would have to say, no, I can't accept that point. And I'm fine with that. I think I could still take that stance and agree with most of the things in this book as constructive criticism as to what the real problems in your environment actually are. And it really perturbs me when believing members of the church aren't interested in reading something like this, whether it be this one or Freedom of Mind by Stephen Hassan, because the church isn't a cult. Well, let's go over it and see if the arguments have any validity or merit. If the bishop or all bishops, any bishop who has people who are struggling with this, if you want to go over it and come to the conclusion that the arguments hold little water, at least you've come to the conclusion knowing what those arguments are. But I find it very hypocritical, very, very much a double standard, how much people in the church have told me, have whined and complained that people aren't interested in reading the Book of Mormon and seeing what it's all about. And why can't you just read it and gain an impression of it? And then you're not interested in reading something like this because the church isn't a cult. How can you think that? Oh, well, let's dive right in and talk about it here. So I hope, and I'm inviting bishops to listen so that you can come to your own conclusion. Okay, so I think without any further ado, I'm going to do a chapter, a video, and we're going to dive right into Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control by Lindsay, Corbden. My book's a bit outdated. So I think I'm going to skip the foreword because the foreword's probably outdated. And it talks about John Dehlin potentially getting excommunicated and other stuff, which has happened now. So there's probably a different forward in the copy that I gave my sister or my cousin when I reordered it. It's got Luna Lindsay's married name on there now. And I'm assuming it has a different forward. So we're just going to get into chapter 1. It started in a garden. So we are taught to cultivate our minds, to control our thoughts, to thoroughly bring our whole being into subjection to the Spirit and law of God, that we may learn to be one and act as one heart of one man, that we may carry out the purposes of God upon the earth. And that is a quote from Prophet Wilford Woodruff in Journal of Discourses, Volume 6, page 115. Well, you can't trust anything Journal of Discourses says. Okay. Although the church kid thinks that it can cherry pick it from it whenever it wants, but you can't take any quote in Journal Discourses that is against the church and take it seriously, apparently. So the volition of man is free. This is the law of their existence, and the Lord cannot violate his own law. Were he to do that, he would cease to be God. Every intelligent being must have the power of choice. Prophet Brigham Young. Okay, and agency. Within your stewardship, complete independence to do what you're told. Orson Scott Card, Saint Speak, the Mormon Dictionary. So that's what agency means. Within your stewardship, complete independence to do what you're told. It started in a garden. Idyllic, pastoral, green, and lush. Every tree bends arm to offer its fruits to the first two human beings. They labor not, they toil not, they know not. Adam and Eve were brought forth into the existence in the midst of a perfect utopia. Of all the world's pains they were spared, perhaps the most merciful was that of complex choice. Imagine such a state, innocent, trusting, childlike, naive. The whole sum of human decisions had been reduced to a simplistic dichotomy, a single commandment: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yet in its own right, it was the tree of death, because those who partook of it would in that same day surely die. One other tree stood to tempt Adam and Eve, yet in their ignorance they weren't aware of the choice. In their immortality, this other tree, the tree of life, was redundant, unneeded, until after their one fateful action it became forever barred to them. Good and evil, life and death, this single option, stark, dramatic, world-changing. Better to remain safe, not to take those risks. Knowledge may be beautiful, exciting, growth-promoting, but it is also confusing, misleading, problematic, scary. Don't dare risk knowledge and the death that will surely follow. The rest of their lives were filled with a lack of decisions, a lack of work, a lack of conflict, no forks in the road, no difficulties, no adventure, peace, eternal boredom, and lonely solitude. They never thought to question or criticize their state. Why should they? They had everything they needed. Almost. With no choices, Adam and Eve had no story. Their freedom was hampered by an absence of variety, of raw information, of conflict and contrast, of complex moral thought. Within these constraints of bliss, they could not progress. And then something changed. Eve faced her one and only decision, the one pivot of agency she had available. It has been debated whether she acted from serpent temptation, outright rebellion, accident, or I don't know this word, ENNUI. I'm going to look it up right now, actually, because I don't like knowing words that I don't know. So I'm going to turn on my phone, and we're going to look it up. Hang on here. ENNUI, meaning a boredom. So it's pronounced ennui. A feeling of weariness and dissatisfaction, boredom. Examples: in reaction to the ennui that he was feeling after working for 12 years in an unchallenging position, Daryl began to look for a new career. So, whenever I come across a word that I don't know, we're going to look it up, even if you knew what it was. I'd like to think that with determination and purpose, she stepped forward saying, "Why should God keep us confined?" Then she willfully, bravely reached out and took a bite. With that, her mind was suddenly filled with possibilities. She became open to the world outside the tamed garden. She discovered a vast planet Earth, a living place full of dangers, frightening choices, wild animals, and evil men. She also learned it was a place of kindness, freedom, autonomy, and independence. As the sweetness still lingered on her tongue, she discovered that the bounds of human potential were limitless. Eve grew up. Adam followed closely behind. In that day, Adam did not die, not immediately. The gates of the garden swung open, and he walked out a free man. Now, with knowledge, he experienced true liberty, to toil as he chose, to learn and grow, to go wherever he wished. Adam had matured and thrown off the shackles of tightly controlled ignorance. He had learned that day that there was more to existence than good versus evil, life versus death. He finally saw that sometimes there are no good options, or that some choices are neutral, that most decisions involve trade-offs. On that day, Adam and Eve learned about moral ambiguity. Together, arm in arm, they strode proudly into the dawn, ready to seed a humanity that would take after them. Independent men and women, resistant to those who would control via enforced ignorance. The day this couple ate the fruit, they knew only one act could allow them to progress, and it was only by making the wrong choice could they make the right choice. Only by defying God could they find liberation. This is one of humanity's most ancient stories. I might argue that it is the first dystopian novel, like 1984, V for Vendetta, or Fahrenheit 451. It certainly follows the same plot. Oppressed people seem to live in a blissful utopia, but they are lied to by a controlling authority until they uncover some piece of information or have an unauthorized insight, at which time they become heroes by attempting escape. Whether the garden story is dystopian depends on whether we frame God as the villain and see Adam's ejection from the garden as a triumph. In religious tellings, God is the hero, and so we usually perceive a utopian story in which the ungrateful, rebellious antagonists stupidly throw away a pretty good thing. But then all dystopias seem like utopias to someone. It's all in whether or not you buy the propaganda. Anyone who has left a controlling religious system may relate to Adam and Eve as heroes. I do. Like them, I threw off the shackles of my mind to join a frightening yet wonderful world of unrestricted knowledge and volition. Free will versus determinism. There are, of course, those who in bitterness and disbelief have rejected the idea of an independent spirit in man that is capable of free will and choice and true liberty. Howard W. Hunter. The nature of free will has been philosophically debated since before written records. Various cultures have placed emphasis on destiny to the extent that they believed gods or spirits would accompany you to enforce your fulfillment of your ordained life mission. Our language still reflects this in words like fate and fortune, which these days have been downgraded to mean mere luck. In modern times, we value free will more highly, though the debate still rages on through our fiction, politics, philosophies, and religions. Will the hero buck his destiny and make a different choice at the end of the story? Are we driven by nature, genetics, and temperament, or nurture, our environment, and choices? Can criminals be rehabilitated, or should they be locked away forever, or even killed? During the Enlightenment, scientists imagined the universe was a clockwork machine, governed by laws that operated predictably. If we understood every law of physics, chemistry, and biology, we could predict each toss of the dice. This scientific view of destiny was known as determinism. Yet the more science reveals in fields like mathematics, biology, and quantum physics, we find the question of free will is never answered. Our personalities seem to be some combination of genetics and environment, both nature and nurture, and the mathematics of chaos theory show that patterns repeat in a semi-predictable shape, yet all we can calculate our probabilities, and even then, the more control we exert, the more likely that the whole system will collapse into disorder. Even the choices of low-level animals like fruit flies have been shown to be a combination of instinct and randomness. Perhaps it is our fate to ask this question forever. We will just get better at asking it, thinking all the while we are choosing to ask it, but are we? In a way, this book explores one aspect of this eternal question, which is, what is freedom? When am I free to choose, and when am I being controlled? Just like all other versions of this question, it seems to have a simple answer on the surface, except for the vast gray area between freedom and force. Most people have a good idea what choice is. I've chosen my career, my car, my furniture, the people I surround myself with, the food I eat, the music I listen to, and what I do any given Friday night. If someone prevents me from choosing these things, I am no longer free. If I wish to stand and someone shoves me down, clearly my free will has been violated. Nor am I considered to be acting freely if someone puts a gun to my head and threatens to kill me. This is called duress. Threats remove liberty, as do threats to loved ones. These are obvious forms of force. The rest of this book explores the gray area. There are no clear lines to be drawn, yet intellectual maturity allows us to fearlessly grapple with concepts that require a second look. I respect your intelligence and won't oversimplify anything just for the sake of an easy answer. This isn't the garden anymore. Cognitive scientists have studied these gray areas since prisoners of war returned from Korea in the 1950s, singing praises of communism. Later, the new religious movements in the 1960s and 70s offered further examples for study and insight. Controlled experiments in human behavior revealed even more. Science now knows much related to how we learn, enculturate, respond to authority, act in groups, resolve internal conflicts, are persuaded to new beliefs, and cling to old beliefs. Is it possible to control someone without ever laying a hand on her or holding a gun to her head? Research says yes. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a high-demand group. Let's take this with a grain of salt, okay? Let's say that you're a believing Mormon and you're like, yeah, that's a bunch of crap. I see no reason to believe that statement. Okay, let's have that skepticism and then go forward with this book, examining what the book has to say and see if any of the arguments are compelling. And if they're not compelling to you, I can't force whether or not the arguments ought to be compelling to you or not. That is your personal opinion. So let's assume that the church is not a cult. Let's dismiss that notion, and then let's carry on and see if the arguments hold weight. So, where was I? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a high-demand group, a deceptive religion that utilizes psychological manipulation via doctrine and culture to restrict the thoughts, behaviors, and emotions of otherwise good and intelligent members. In a word, though it is admittedly a high-charged, loaded word, Mormonism is a cult. Again, let's be skeptical. What do I mean by cult? I will explore that in depth in the next chapter. This book is aimed primarily at ex-Mormons seeking to understand their experiences, though members may also benefit. If you are a happy Latter-day Saint who finds the church spiritually fulfilling in every way, then you may find little to relate to. But it will expand your understanding of those who aren't happy, those who do have doubts, and those who eventually leave. Those who have never been LDS will see in detail how thought reform techniques are applied in practice. When through the course of my life I met former members of Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and fundamentalist Christians, I discovered kindred spirits, joined in bonds that only a shared, similar experience can generate. Ex-members of high-demand groups continue to have difficulties long after leaving. And I know this because I co-host for a peer support group where we have a number of people. It's mostly geared towards ex-Mormons and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, but whatever your high-demand group is, we've had people from all over the spectrum come and join us online. And there's a lot of similarities, even though there's subtle differences or there's terminology differences. It's like this different kinds of soup with the same rotten tomatoes in it. I co-host for a group like that. It's called After the Truth. You can find us online and join one of our meetings, afterthetruth.ca, and my profile is on About Us. So, ex-members of high-demand groups continue to have difficulties long after leaving, and I did. Ex-Mormons are no different. This book is intended to help them recover from the emotional manipulation and spiritual abuse they may have suffered. Margaret Singer is a leading cult researcher and clinical psychologist. She said leaving a cult is for many one of the most difficult things they will ever do, and it's especially difficult to do alone, and which I did. I did it, and I did it alone, and it was one of the hardest things that I did. But maintaining participation in the group was no longer viable, and it was emotionally stifling. So I had to leave. I had to run away, and then I had to spend years unpacking all the crap that I went through, crap that I've never been able to discuss in any of my reactivation attempts, which is why I'm going through this, because if I were to come back, again, we have to have a discussion about this. Okay? I'm not just going to reject all these premises and accept your premises upon a desire to return to church so you can be happy that I accept all the correct life ideas. That's what one of the problems was in the first place. And I'm going to be going over to that when I get into my Facebook notes that I wrote, 10 to 15 years ago. So, many ex-Mormons will relate to this statement. I know I do. Exit story. We are all condemned by birth to be indoctrinated, mystified, and shaped by authorities we did not choose. Sam Keane, Hymns to an Unknown God. I ponder on what it would be like to experience personal freedom. I have always lived and grown up in the free country of the United States of America, but I myself have never been emotionally independent from the crippling shackles which have held me bound. Diane Klein, Woman Redeemed. Ex-Mormons find it healing to tell the stories of how they lost their faith. LDS exit stories are all over the internet and in books. My story isn't terribly sensational or all that different from anyone else's, but you may be interested in knowing who I am so you can understand why I care so much. My grandmother was the first Mormon convert in our family. She had a strong testimony but rarely went to church. My mother and father converted shortly after they married. I was born under the covenant in Salt Lake City and raised in eastern Washington. My parents were very active. We rarely missed attending church. I was an intelligent, bright, curious child. While I found many sacrament meetings and Sunday school lessons repetitive and boring, I thrilled at exploring the mysteries, delving into the scriptures, speculating endlessly about open-ended questions. Where is Kolob? How did Nephi get across the ocean? Is there scriptural evidence of dinosaurs? I couldn't imagine a version of natural history or human existence that didn't conform to scripture. I highlighted that sentence. My father is a talented scriptorian, and I was set to follow in his footsteps. I proudly memorized the Articles of Faith and Scripture Mastery verses, graduated from seminary, and read the Book of Mormon 3.5 times. I also took to heart concepts like obedience and faithfulness. I pride myself on how little I murmured against my parents and how unfalteringly I abide the rules of the church. I wore my dresses knee length, waited to date until age 16, and almost never listened to pop or rock music. I judged family members and peers who scoffed at the rules. Sometimes I failed to meet a commandment out of laziness or exhaustion, such as skipping church or missing scripture reading on a given day, but it was never out of disbelief or rebellion. I followed this worldview the way I followed the laws of the land. I always thought I had critical thinking skills, but therein lies the trick. Everyone wants to think they're rational. And if someone you trust tells you your beliefs are rational, you will think they are. And I did. How quickly the proud do fall. When I turned 18, I got accepted to BYU with a scholarship, met a guy, fell in love, converted him to the church, and married him outside the temple with a plan to get sealed a year later when he would become eligible. Sounds a bit rushed. We moved to Provo, I got pregnant, dropped out, moved back home, and just over a year after my marriage, I kicked him out, filed for divorce, and became a single mom. I found it very hard to judge anyone after that when I learned how tough and scary the real world is, especially for the unprepared. It was my first major shift out of a totalist mindset as my views softened. I raised my child alone with the help of my parents for many years, while seeking a suitable eternal companion in the young single adult ward, which is the congregations that I attended for 9 years. I steadily built a career in the computer industry, frowned upon for women, with the hopes that any day, against all odds, I'd meet Brother Right. I had more than odds to beat. I had stigma because I was divorced and had one child. Yeah, if you're a single mom in the single adult wards, I hate to say this, but you're going to be seen as damaged goods. You're going to be seen as having baggage. Nobody wants that. No return missionary wants that. Like, she must have had a very tough experience, because towing a kid around in the single adult wards, that's a red flag for being undateable right there. So I'm very sorry to hear that, Luna Lindsay. I understand because I know how judgmental these congregations are. And one of the things that I did not like, I was very unhappy with, was when I would overhear women say, if a man hasn't been in a relationship for more than 6 months, he must be damaged goods. In other words, you don't want to date someone like that. You don't want to get married to someone like that, because it's going to be a problem in your marriage. Maybe that's true to some degree, that you would want to consider that. But that just means that anybody who's male who has had any problems in their life with abuse or with not being heard by their parents or being bullied or whatever their issues are that have caused them to, not be in and out of, dating relationships for longer than 6 months, or they've gone longer than 6 months without dating. Like, that just makes it so you have no hope. Okay? Like, I was bullied from grade 1 through grade 12, okay, by virtually everybody in all age ranges. I had kids who were in grade 1 throwing rocks at me when I was in grade 6, and or in grade 8, and if I dare retaliate against those kids, then I had people in grades a little lower than me trying to defend those kids, okay? And people didn't know I was Mormon. I didn't really talk about it because I grew up in an area that had disdain for anybody who was religious. If you were religious, everyone else was a bunch of atheists and you're an idiot. And so I didn't talk about being Mormon. I hid the fact that I went to church as much as I could. And I was a loner for most of my grade school and high school years. I didn't have any friends. And then there's other issues on top of that. But again, I've seen these videos where female therapist type people will say women are not interested in your past issues. They find that unattractive. Well, that's probably true, but these are the things that happened to me. They had an effect on me. They hurt me, and now I'm undateable for it, apparently, because I'm in the process of working through that, and people who are going to be jerks and idiots about it aren't being helpful. So, and this is one of the reasons why I'm reading this book, is so we can go over the issues that are a problem in the YSA, or Young Single Adult Wards, as Luna Lindsay has called them. So, in community college, I found more acceptance among non-Mormons. They didn't just tolerate my idiosyncrasies, they admired me for who I was. I shared interests with the local science fiction club. I made close friends there, and we all allowed for each other's beliefs. I've met my first pagans, agnostics, atheists, and even a Buddhist. Somehow we all got along. I felt as if I didn't have to try to be anyone for them. During those years, I hardly had time to be active at church. With motherhood, work, and going to school, I didn't fit in there anyway. I strayed a little, but I tried to at least attend meetings on Sunday and be in the choir. At some point, the guilt settled in, and I felt the need to get my life back on track. I had graduated and was well into my career. I still wasn't married. I blamed myself for that. I prayed hard for guidance to know what I should do. Would I find a husband? Should I move to a new town? Should I continue to work in the computer field? During fervent, frequent, desperate prayer, I finally received an answer. It was one of those spiritual experiences I had read about, with warmth, love, feeling the presence of God, and a promise. Repent, get worthy for the temple, make those covenants, and there you will receive your answer. So I did. And it wasn't easy getting there. I had a lot of high bars to reach, standards that had come much more easily to me as a teenager. And that's true. Once you leave the church for an X amount of time, coming back is really hard. As much as people want to rip on David A. Bednar for leading that child around the way he did on that video, the point that he's making is absolutely correct. Once you cross that line, once you commit that sin, it is really, 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 really difficult to come back. I met each challenge until I got my temple recommend. Finally, in the celestial room, I sobbed and sobbed. My mother wondered if I was okay. Yes, I was. I got the answer, plain as day. Within the month, you will meet your soulmate, your future spouse. I met a man, we dated, I was sure it was him. Then a month later I learned he'd already been engaged the whole time to another woman. After all that work and sincerity on my part, God broke his promise. I became angry. I wasn't willing to accept the blame this time. I'd done everything that was asked of me. At no time did I question the truth of the church. I searched for some message just as I was trained. Perhaps I thought by failing to give me a straight answer, God was telling me to figure things out on my own. It was the only possibility that made any sense. The other options, that if God didn't exist or that Mormonism was wrong, were unthinkable. Fine, I decided I would make choices for myself. I took off my garments and decided to take nothing for granted from then on. I decided to stop believing so blindly. I still looked to God and the church for answers, but when no answers were forthcoming or when they didn't make sense, I decided to rely on myself. That led me to deciding to drink caffeine to medicate my ADHD, instead of taking the stronger drug, church-approved Ritalin. I also decided to drink alcohol at social gatherings because it alleviated my social anxiety. I started watching rated R movies. I began to hold some minor heretical beliefs, like maybe our actions in this life really didn't decide our eternal fate. Maybe other religions held just as much truth as Mormonism. Maybe the power of the priesthood was no different from everyday miracles that happened to everyone the world over. During that short phase, I had one shoe in and one shoe out. No amount of direct attack could shake my faith. Criticisms of Joseph Smith and polygamy? No problem. Kinderhook plates and salamander papers? Blood atonement? All of it sounded like a bunch of anti-Mormon propagandistic lies. I never doubted the church. Yes, sometimes I doubted the existence of God, but if there was a God, I couldn't fathom one that wasn't Mormon. The Protestant God seemed empty, and the Catholic God seemed cruel. I knew nothing of any non-Christian concept of God, but why would they be any more right than the Mormons? I never allowed myself to think too critically of the church, even when I was so angry. For the most part, the mind control methods were doing their job. My serious doubts came from an entirely different direction. I encountered several destabilizing paradigm shifts in quick succession. Among other things, I participated in political debates in online chat rooms. This particular group of people required proof for all claims. I was expected to provide sources for facts, and as I researched, I quickly discovered that some of my facts were entirely incorrect. They would tolerate no logical fallacies, anecdotal evidence, or proof by analogy. Only reason and reliable data was permitted. In short, I learned the logic in which I took so much pride was not in fact logical. I had propagated untruths and evenly applied my values. I discovered for the first time that I was wrong about a great many things. As I learned the new rules, I managed to win many of the debates, but in the meantime I experienced the feeling of disillusionment. Perhaps for the first time, I realized the world outside the garden wasn't as the church had described. During those months, I read part of a sci-fi novel that challenged my political beliefs so much that I had to put it down. I began to wonder what else I might be wrong about. It was in this state that I got my answer to whether the church was true. It came to me like a bolt of lightning, like a testimony, like a powerful knowledge of truth with a capital T, with the same answer I'd always imagined I'd feel when I prayed to know if the Book of Mormon was true. Like most of my profound peak experiences and spiritual epiphanies, it happened when I wasn't doing anything at all related to the church. I'm a science fiction writer. In my curiosity, I read about artificial intelligence and how someday we might make a computer mind more intelligent than humanity, and how such a mind might create something even smarter, and so on, until it achieves infinite intelligence and invents everything we've ever imagined, and then a whole lot more. This is an entire field of thought called transhumanism. Many authors take the dark view of this technological singularity in stories like The Terminator and The Matrix, but I'm an optimistic. Superintelligent computer wouldn't necessarily be evil. I came to many conclusions about the nature of this being, about how incomprehensible and unknowable such a creature could be. It would have purposes and designs far beyond our ken. It would pursue goals we couldn't fathom. No human could understand or predict its actions. I concluded that such a being would probably find us uninteresting and leave us alone. I wrote my many complex thoughts in an essay, and only then did I make the connection. The being I had described was identical to God. In one instant, I came to realize that no man can know God, and that any man who made such a claim with certainty was lying. Even if God sent angels bearing messages to communicate his will, it would be interpreted through a human lens, muddied and distorted. That didn't stop human prophets from trying. Their messages were simplistic, and the motives they ascribed to God were overly human. He's a father, he's caring, he's jealous or angry. They claim to know his will as if he were a giant, powerful human being in the sky. We had assigned human motives to God. We had made God in our image. How full of ourselves we are to bring God to our level. In that instant, I could no longer believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet, nor could I believe that any other prophets had the slightest clue. All written scripture became worthless to me. I became, in that moment, agnostic. Yet I still doubted myself. I could be wrong. I could be confused. I could be deceived. I decided to give it some time to see if any new insights cleared things up. I avoided any kind of commitment to my new path. I prayed, but how could my prayers have any meaning after such an epiphany? If God's will is incomprehensible, praying for answers would attempt to put God in my tiny genie bottle like a slave. After 3 months, I had not changed my mind. No revelations came. Nothing could consolidate the gospel in this new, undeniable belief. So I made the final leap. I knew if I did, I would never return. I haven't. That was January 2001. I was 26. I resigned my membership 3 years later. I might have left it at that, but in 2005, a friend of mine was living with a woman who claimed he were raised in a small cult run by her abusive father. One day, this woman asked me if I had been deprogrammed from Mormonism. Shocked, I told her no. I didn't need deprogramming. I'd gone through the process of developing new beliefs and a foundation of values to live by. I was fine. Over time, I thought more about it. Perhaps she was onto something. After all, in spite of therapy, self-help, and journaling, I still had certain hang-ups I never seemed to get over. Maybe they had something to do with my unresolved feelings for Mormonism. So I started reading about cults and mind control. I began interacting with ex-Mormons and learning the hidden details about LDS history and the bad experiences of many members. I encountered angry people, hurt people, and depressed people. Without my Mormon blinders on, I could hear their stories without instant dismissal and judgment. I came to see that I too bore a burden of unprocessed grief and toxic beliefs. I began to deprogram myself. I didn't realize just how much fear I lived under until this phase. Fear of disaster, fear of the apocalypse, fear of Satan, fear of evil spirits, fear of sinning, fear of the world, etc. I began to work through them and the anger and the sense of betrayal and the grief for all that wasted time, 2.5 decades of my life, and thousands of dollars in tithing. Ironically, the woman who suggested deprogramming ran a small cult herself. My friend eventually left her group and stayed at my house to piece her life back together. When she did, she benefited from my research. In writing this book, I hope to help others the way I helped her and myself. I'm going into 45 minutes here. I think I want to cut her short. I'm going to do a part 2 of this chapter where I just read 5 pages. So I'm now at the illusion of choice on page 9 in chapter 1. It started in a garden. So I will be picking it up in part 2 later on. And it takes as long as it takes to get through this book. This is Recovering Agency, Lifting the Veil of Mormon Mind Control by Lindsay. I'm Chad Lang. Enjoy your church and have a nice life.